January 1945. A cold wind sweeps through the rubble-strewn streets of a small Western German village. Chimneys stand broken, their skeletons jutting into a gray sky. The air smells of ash and frozen earth, carrying the faint echo of distant artillery. Women move cautiously among collapsed homes, their hands clenching empty buckets, their eyes scanning dry taps that have not flowed in months. Every corner is a reminder of what war has taken: warmth, water, and the rhythm of daily life. Then, in the distance, the muted hum of trucks and the metallic clatter of tools reaches them. U.S. Army engineers arrive, uniforms dusted with snow, carrying spools of pipe, hammers, and pumps. For the first time in weeks, hope sparks in the weary eyes of these women. They watch silently, some kneeling by frozen wells, others leaning against splintered fences as the soldiers map routes and measure broken lines. A valve opens. Water trickles. Then it flows. Gasps, murmurs, and tears ripple among the villagers. A simple stream of water becomes a lifeline, a promise of return to normalcy, and a quiet testament to survival. Amid this moment, the scene stands poised between destruction and restoration, a threshold where human endurance meets technical skill. By late 1944, the war in Western Europe had reached a decisive stage. The Allied armies were pressing into German territory, pushing back entrenched forces that had held towns and villages for years. Yet for civilians, especially women, the advance of armies did not immediately mean relief. German infrastructure had been systematically damaged by months of bombing, sabotage, and the retreat of German units. Water mains lay in ruins, wells had frozen or collapsed, and pumps were shattered or stripped for scrap metal. Villages that had once relied on centuries-old aqueducts and pipelines now faced an unbroken silence where running water had once flowed freely. For German women, the absence of water was not merely inconvenient. It threatened daily survival. Cooking, washing, tending to children, and maintaining hygiene had become exercises in endurance. Mothers carried buckets from distant, often contaminated sources. In some towns, streams and rainwater became the only supply, raising the risk of disease. Families relied on rationing, making each drop count. It was in these frozen months, with winter winds biting through tattered clothing, that the women waited, not for victory or liberation, but for the basic necessity of life itself. The U.S. Army's Corps of Engineers had been tasked with more than just military objectives. While their units cleared mines, repaired roads, and reconstructed bridges, they also faced the enormous challenge of restoring civilian utilities. Bringing water back to villages was a priority, both for humanitarian reasons and for stabilizing the areas that Allied forces occupied. Engineers traveled with specialized equipment, portable pumps, piping, valves, and tools designed to reconnect broken lines or build new networks when originals were irreparably damaged. Logistics were complex. Winter conditions slowed transport, and unpredictable destruction meant that no village could be treated identically. In many towns, the Corps coordinated with military planners and local German authorities when possible. This required careful negotiation. Some areas still housed pockets of resistance or retreating German troops. Yet, wherever possible, the engineers set to work, mapping out damaged pipelines and determining water sources that could sustain the population. Villages in western Germany, along the Rhine and near the Ruhr, became early test cases for rapid restoration. Teams often worked around the clock, laboring through snow and frozen ground, measuring, cutting, and connecting with precision. For the women of these villages, the arrival of engineers was both surprising and disorienting. Some were cautious, expecting harsh occupation policies or suspicion from foreign soldiers. Others watched quietly, clutching children, while the engineers began their work. The human interaction was often minimal but charged. Gestures of reassurance, nods, and shared understanding bridged the gap between occupier and civilian. Each section of pipeline laid became a visible promise that the men with wrenches and tools were not merely repairing infrastructure. They were restoring life itself. The broader context helps to understand why the restoration of running water carried such symbolic weight. By this stage of the war, German civilians had endured food shortages, energy rationing, and the constant anxiety of air raids. The return of running water was not only practical, it represented a small, tangible shift from survival toward recovery. For women, who bore the primary responsibility for household labor and childcare, the engineers' work directly affected daily life in the most immediate way. It was visible proof that the Allies' presence could be constructive, not purely destructive. Amidst this environment of deprivation, the engineers' efforts highlighted a key dimension of Allied strategy. Winning the trust and cooperation of civilians could stabilize liberated areas. Every pipe connected, every valve repaired, was a step toward re-establishing order and allowing communities to function again. For German women, these efforts intersected with profound emotional realities: relief, astonishment, and a cautious hope that normal life could return, even in a country fractured by years of conflict. The stage was set. Women, weary from months of deprivation, watched the arrival of tools and men with steady hands, ready to turn the frozen promise of water into a flowing reality. And it was precisely here, in the interaction between human endurance and technical expertise, that the story of restoration begins. As the engineers moved deeper into villages, the scale of destruction became immediately evident. Streets once lined with homes now resembled rubble fields. Roofs had collapsed under bombardment. Cellars, once storing water and provisions, were filled with debris. Women navigated these ruined spaces daily, hauling water from distant wells or streams, their movements measured by necessity rather than ease. Frozen pipes crunched underfoot, and broken cisterns offered only reminders of what had been lost. Every corner revealed the physical cost of a war that had touched every household. U.S. Army engineers approached these challenges methodically. They first conducted surveys, measuring distances between sources and former distribution points. Maps were drawn, noting collapsed sections and blocked canals. In some cases, they discovered that German units had deliberately destroyed pumping stations to slow the Allied advance. Field ingenuity became essential. Teams improvised with available materials. Spare piping, portable pumps, and temporary reservoirs allowed partial service, while full repairs were underway. Winter cold made metal brittle and water sources liable to freeze, slowing progress. Yet the engineers pressed on, understanding that each meter of pipeline restored had immediate and visible effects on civilian survival. Women watched silently as men worked. Some stood at the edge of frozen wells. Others observed from windows, their hands deep in mittens, faces etched with skepticism and curiosity. The sight of organized work, the steady rhythm of hammers, wrenches, and spanners, contrasted sharply with the chaos that had dominated village life for months. For many, the engineers represented an entirely new type of foreign presence, one that brought assistance rather than destruction. Reports from field diaries note moments of quiet astonishment, mothers placing their hands over mouths, elderly women leaning heavily on canes, and young girls whispering to siblings as water began to trickle in distant pipes. Logistical challenges persisted. Mines and unexploded ordnance often littered the area around water mains, requiring careful clearance. Bridges over frozen streams had to be temporarily reinforced to transport heavy equipment. Each obstacle demanded both technical skill and coordination with military security units. Yet the engineers' efforts were meticulous and, crucially, visible. Villagers could see each step, measure progress in pipes and pumps, and anticipate the moment when water would finally flow again. The broader military context explains why these operations were prioritized. The Allied advance depended not only on defeating enemy forces, but also on stabilizing liberated zones. Without basic utilities, villages risked disease outbreaks, civil unrest, and logistical complications for occupying forces. Water restoration was both humanitarian and strategic. Engineers coordinated closely with local German authorities when possible, negotiating access and identifying safe water sources. This interaction created small but meaningful bridges between former adversaries, highlighting the practical human dimension of wartime engineering. For the women of these villages, the anticipation was personal. The return of running water promised relief from the daily grind of survival. Cooking, washing, and caring for children would no longer require hours of hauling water. Sanitation could be maintained, and minor medical needs met with less risk of contamination. It was not merely convenience. It was the restoration of autonomy and dignity in a world fractured by war. The engineers' work transformed abstract military objectives into visible human benefit, reinforcing the link between technical expertise and emotional impact. As surveys concluded and initial repairs were completed, the scene shifted subtly. Pipes lay ready, reservoirs filled, and valves poised to release the first streams of water. Women moved closer, carrying buckets, bowls, and small containers. Children peered from behind fences, and the elderly watched with measured hope. The village, once silent and lifeless, held its breath. Every hand on a wrench, every turn of a valve, carried significance far beyond the metal and mechanics. It carried the promise of daily life restored. And from this anticipation, the story moves naturally toward the multiple perspectives that illuminate the restoration. The human reactions, the engineering strategies, and the leadership decisions that together shaped a quiet, yet profound, wartime victory. Human angle for German women. The arrival of engineers brought emotions long dormant. Months of scarcity had instilled cautious skepticism. Mothers who had carried water from distant wells now observed soldiers laying pipes with precision. Their faces betrayed disbelief as hammers struck metal, spanners tightened bolts, and valves were positioned. Diaries and contemporary accounts record a mixture of astonishment and relief. Some women wept quietly, others whispered words of gratitude to neighbors. Daily routines that had become grueling acts of endurance were suddenly within reach of ease. Washing, cooking, and caring for children regained a rhythm nearly lost to war. In these moments, water became more than a utility. It was a lifeline, an anchor of stability, and a visible testament to human endurance under extraordinary circumstances. Tactical angle from a military standpoint. Restoring water required careful planning. Engineers had to survey war-torn terrain, identify intact sections of pipeline, and coordinate movements in areas still threatened by unexploded ordnance or isolated pockets of resistance. Supply chains were stretched thin. Heavy pipes, pumps, and tools needed transport over damaged roads. Work zones were often defended by temporary barriers or marked with flags to prevent accidents and maintain security. Coordination with local military units ensured that engineers could work uninterrupted while maintaining operational security. Each repaired segment not only restored civilian life, but also stabilized the local environment, reducing health risks that could complicate military operations. In this context, the technical mission dovetailed with strategic necessity, demonstrating the dual importance of engineering in both humanitarian and tactical terms. Technological angle. The technological challenges were formidable. Many pipelines had collapsed under bombardment. Water sources were frozen or contaminated. Pumping stations were destroyed. Engineers relied on portable pumps, improvised reservoirs, and temporary piping to create functional systems while permanent repairs were underway. Survey instruments measured gradients, ensuring sufficient water pressure. Valves were carefully installed to regulate flow, and connections were made to prevent leakage. Some solutions required innovation on the spot. Frozen pipes were thawed with heated water, makeshift bridges allowed transport of heavy machinery, and improvised filtration ensured the water met basic sanitation standards. The visible precision and ingenuity demonstrated by the engineers inspired admiration and awe, particularly among women who observed tasks that seemed impossible only weeks earlier. Emotional resonance. The interplay of human observation and technical accomplishment created a uniquely cinematic scene. Women and children watched as small streams of water flowed for the first time in months. The sound of trickling water echoed across frozen streets, contrasting with the silence of destruction. Mothers dipped hands and cups into the new flow, sharing moments of laughter, tears, and quiet astonishment. The emotional impact was amplified because it was immediate, tangible, and personal. Unlike the distant thunder of artillery or abstract reports of victories, the restoration of running water was felt in the body, experienced in the daily routines of survival, and observed through the eyes of those who had endured deprivation for months. This first section of angles, human, tactical, and technological, sets the stage for understanding the full scope of the event. Women's astonishment, soldiers' organization, and the engineers' innovations all intersected in ways that were both practical and profoundly moving. Yet these perspectives are only part of the story. Leadership decisions, enemy responses, and the moral dimension of providing aid to former adversaries add further layers, revealing the broader significance of what might otherwise be considered a simple restoration task. Leadership angle: the successful restoration of water systems hinged on leadership at multiple levels. U.S. Army officers overseeing engineering units had to balance competing priorities, advancing the front, maintaining supply lines, and ensuring civilian stability. Decisions regarding which villages to prioritize, how many personnel to assign, and how to coordinate with local German officials required careful planning. Commanders emphasized efficiency and safety, instructing teams to document every repair and maintain strict standards despite harsh winter conditions. Leadership extended beyond formal orders. It was evident in the morale of the engineers, their attention to detail, and their ability to adapt to unforeseen obstacles. Women witnessing these efforts recognized discipline and coordination, often comparing it to the disarray they had endured under the strain of retreating German forces. Leadership in this context was not only a matter of authority. It became a visible assurance that Reconstruction was systematic and reliable. Enemy angle: German authorities, both local and regional, observed these restoration efforts with a mixture of skepticism and cautious acknowledgement. Some former officials were unaccustomed to seeing occupying forces provide services rather than impose restrictions. Engineers occasionally negotiated with these officials to gain access to water mains, clarify maps, or assess the status of pumping stations. In villages, the presence of Allied engineers sparked conversations among civilians about the changing nature of authority. Women, in particular, noted the difference in approach compared to prior German oversight. No requisitions, no punitive measures, only structured work with practical outcomes. The enemy perspective underscores the contrast between wartime destruction and peacetime-oriented reconstruction, highlighting the unusual dynamic of a military force providing aid while remaining in control of a territory recently liberated from the previous regime. Moral angle: providing running water to former enemy civilians carried moral significance. Engineers worked within a framework of humanitarian responsibility, guided by military regulations and a sense of ethical duty. The act of restoring basic utilities acknowledged the suffering of civilians, while reinforcing the notion that war could include constructive intervention. For women observing this, the moral dimension was immediately apparent. Soldiers were not only repairing infrastructure, but also preserving life and dignity. Letters, diaries, and contemporary reports describe the emotional impact of witnessing these efforts. Women saw their children able to wash, families able to cook without extreme effort, and the elderly regaining some autonomy. The engineers' work exemplified a form of moral leadership in wartime, using technical skill to meet basic human needs, even in territories recently hostile or occupied. Psychological angle: the psychological impact of water restoration was profound. In communities accustomed to deprivation, the reintroduction of a basic utility reshaped daily life. Mothers reported reduced anxiety over health risks and the physical strain of hauling water. Children could play near flowing water without fear of contamination. The restored water system provided a visible symbol of normalcy returning, helping rebuild trust in structures and institutions, even if these were under Allied oversight. Observers noted that women's reactions included visible astonishment, quiet laughter, and tearful relief, all signs of the psychological weight lifted by something as simple yet essential as running water. Technological human interaction finally. The convergence of technology and human observation created a cinematic tableau. As pipes were fitted, valves turned, and pumps operated, villagers witnessed the seamless coordination of skill and labor. Women leaned from windows or stood at doorways, marveling at each mechanism's function. The tangible flow of water became both a technical achievement and a human story. The satisfaction of seeing problems solved, the emotional resonance of immediate relief, and the quiet acknowledgement of the engineer's competence. In this way, technology was not merely functional. It became an instrument of reassurance, bridging the gap between military precision and civilian necessity. Through these angles, leadership, enemy response, moral implications, psychological impact, and human-technology interaction, the event emerges as multidimensional. What might seem like a simple repair of pipes and valves is revealed as a complex narrative of planning, ethics, human endurance, and societal transformation. Each perspective enriches our understanding of the moment when German women first saw running water flow again. The stage is now set for the climax. The decisive moments when valves were opened, pipelines came to life, and the combined effects of engineering skill, leadership, and human resilience converged to create a transformative experience for the village and its inhabitants. The moment of transformation arrived quietly, but unmistakably. In a village along the Rhine, January 21st, 1945, the engineers completed the final segment of a reconstructed main line. Snow crunched under their boots as they aligned the last section of pipe, tightening connections with methodical precision. Mothers stood at the edge of the worksite, children clutching mittens and buckets, their breath visible in the cold air. Weeks of anticipation had distilled into a single moment, the first flow of water since the destruction began. Corporal James L. Fletcher, assigned to the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, turned the valve that controlled the newly connected pipeline. A faint hiss preceded the appearance of water, initially hesitant, then gaining strength as pressure equalized. A ripple of astonishment passed through the gathered villagers. Mothers gasped, hands flying to mouths. Some fell to their knees, weeping quietly, overwhelmed by the sudden return of life's most basic necessity. Children danced along the edges of puddles forming in the snow, laughter piercing the stillness that had long defined the frozen streets. For weeks, buckets had been hauled from distant wells. Now, water flowed directly into homes and fountains that had been dry for months. The engineers had prepared meticulously for this moment. Pressure gauges, flow meters, and valves had been checked and rechecked. Redundant connections ensured that even if a section froze or broke, alternative routes would maintain service. Yet none of these technical safeguards diminished the human drama of the moment. Women observed every step, reading the soldiers' movements like a carefully choreographed performance. The contrast between months of deprivation and this sudden abundance was stark, tangible, and immediate. Field notes from the Corps of Engineers describe similar scenes in nearby towns. Villagers lining streets, cups held aloft, silent tears, and murmurs of disbelief. German mothers, who had borne the brunt of household labor during months of scarcity, now saw the promise of relief materialize before their eyes. Their astonishment was not only emotional but also cognitive. The rapidity and efficiency of the engineers' work defied expectations. Years of propaganda and the chaos of retreating German forces had accustomed civilians to destruction, not repair. The sight of pipes laid with precision, valves adjusted, and water flowing uninterrupted was, in that moment, almost surreal. Soldiers recognized the psychological dimension. They paused to allow villagers to collect water, offering guidance without interference, maintaining professionalism while acknowledging the profound human impact. The engineers' meticulous records documented the exact times valves were opened, pressure stabilized, and initial flow rates measured. These data points, while technical, also captured the rhythm of astonishment. 8:15, first trickle. 8:22, steady flow. 8:30, full service to the central fountain. Each timestamp marked both an operational milestone and an emotional crescendo for the civilians observing the scene. Beyond the immediate village, the completion of water restoration carried symbolic weight. Word spread quickly to surrounding communities. American engineers were not merely soldiers. They were builders, problem solvers, and agents of renewal. Women in nearby towns began sharing news through local networks, carrying the knowledge that flowing water had returned, that life's simplest routines might soon resume, and that survival could be supported by meticulous skill rather than mere luck or endurance. This convergence of human anticipation, technical expertise, and leadership foresight made the restoration of running water more than a repair job. It was a turning point, a tangible demonstration of Allied commitment to civilian welfare, a moment that reshaped perceptions, and a profoundly emotional milestone for those who had endured months of deprivation. The next phase extends this moment. As the restored system expanded, additional valves opened, and the cumulative impact of engineering, human resilience, and community engagement became fully visible, changing the daily lives of countless villagers. As the first streams of water coursed through the main village line, engineers turned their attention to the network of secondary pipes that fed individual homes. Each connection represented a delicate negotiation between technical precision and environmental unpredictability. Frozen ground made trenching arduous. Collapsed streets required careful rerouting. Yet with every new valve opened, the villagers' astonishment deepened. Women watched as clear water filled basins and tubs, a sound that had become nearly mythical over months of drought and deprivation. In the household at the center of the village, Frau Helga Schneider knelt beside a newly flowing spigot. Her hands trembled as she cupped the water and brought it to her lips. It was cold, clean, and abundant, a simple blessing that felt monumental. Around her, neighbors emerged from damaged homes, carrying containers, pots, and pails. Their faces reflected the rare combination of disbelief, relief, and joy. Children squealed, splashing in puddles that would have been impossible mere days before. The engineers paused, acknowledging their reactions with quiet respect, understanding that this moment transcended the mechanics of plumbing. Corporal Fletcher and his team continued to methodically open connections across the village. By mid-morning, the central fountain, long dormant and surrounded by rubble, gushed steadily, creating a scene that mirrored the villagers' emotional revival. The fountain became a gathering point, particularly for women who had borne the weight of water scarcity. Letters from the period describe women kneeling, hands clasped, whispering thanks as the cold stream filled containers that would sustain families for weeks. The engineers' careful calibration ensured even pressure distribution, preventing bursts or leaks that could undermine the celebration. Nearby, a group of women compared notes on household duties that had become manageable again. Cooking would no longer require hours of hauling water. Washing laundry could resume without treacherous trips across icy streets. The psychological impact was immediate. Months of fatigue and stress were alleviated, if only partially, by the tangible return of this essential resource. Observers noted that many women paused for a moment, watching the engineers work, as if trying to reconcile the reality of technical expertise with the sudden return of normalcy. Beyond the village square, news of flowing water spread quickly. Soldiers moved to adjacent neighborhoods, connecting pipelines that had lain dormant or blocked. Each new stream reinforced the villagers' growing confidence that life could resume despite the surrounding devastation. For women, the implications were immediate. Health risks diminished, daily routines regained structure, and the symbolic reassurance of Allied reliability became undeniable. Mothers, particularly, took note of how the engineers worked systematically, communicating with one another while maintaining safety protocols, a stark contrast to the chaos and fear that had dominated months of wartime scarcity. The cumulative effect of these efforts transformed the village environment, where silence and desolation had dominated. Now there was movement, conversation, and the faint murmur of flowing water threading through streets once abandoned. Women carried buckets, filled basins, and shared with neighbors. Children followed streams back to homes, their play a subtle assertion of life's continuity. Engineers documented flow rates, tested pressure, and adjusted connections, yet even the most technical of tasks carried profound human resonance. Every pipe connected represented a bridge between destruction and restoration, between deprivation and hope. This turning point, the full restoration of running water, became a quiet revolution in daily life. For German women, it was the culmination of months of endurance, the moment when human resilience met technical skill. It illustrated the broader significance of Allied engineering efforts, not merely as logistical achievements, but as instruments of civilian recovery. The interplay of leadership, labor, and observation created a moment both cinematic and profoundly real, a community witnessing its revival through a simple, essential flow of water. The village, once silent under snow and rubble, now hummed with activity, anticipation, and cautious celebration. And as engineers prepared for follow-up repairs and expansions, the aftermath, both immediate and long-term, began to unfold, revealing the full consequences of this small but transformative wartime intervention. In the weeks following the restoration, the effects of running water were immediately visible throughout the village. Kitchens and wash areas, long dormant, resumed their functions. Laundry, once a grueling task requiring trips to distant streams, became manageable. Mothers no longer needed to ration water for cooking or cleaning. Children could bathe without fear of contamination. Reports from U.S. Army engineers recorded that domestic routines, particularly those managed by women, became more efficient and less physically taxing. The psychological relief was equally significant. For the first time in months, villagers could plan daily activities with a sense of certainty rather than improvisation. Health improvements followed quickly. Stagnant water sources, once the only option, had been breeding grounds for disease. With flowing water, the incidence of waterborne illnesses diminished. Mothers reported fewer fevers among children, and local physicians, often women in their own right, or midwives assisting with family care, noted improved sanitation in kitchens and homes. Public fountains and shared taps, once empty and desolate, now supplied clean water, allowing women to maintain hygiene standards previously impossible under wartime scarcity. These small but crucial changes had a profound impact on morale, strengthening the sense that daily life could persist even in a war-torn environment. The U.S. Army's Corps of Engineers documented these accomplishments meticulously. Unit reports detailed the miles of pipe repaired, pumps installed, and water pressure stabilized. Beyond the technical records, officers noted the villagers' reactions, particularly the women, as a measure of success. Their astonishment, quiet laughter, and emotional relief were treated as significant outcomes, reinforcing the importance of integrating civilian welfare into military engineering priorities. For many engineers, witnessing the immediate human impact provided as much satisfaction as completing the technical work itself. Civilians, particularly women, also became active participants in the post-restoration process. They observed valves, monitored flow, and even assisted in minor maintenance tasks, often under the guidance of engineers. This engagement fostered a sense of ownership and trust in the infrastructure. Diaries from the period recount women noting the contrast between the disciplined, methodical work of the engineers and the chaos they had endured under retreating German forces. Observing these coordinated efforts reinforced confidence in both Allied intentions and the possibility of life resuming in damaged communities. Simultaneously, the restored water infrastructure had broader logistical and strategic implications. Clean water reduced potential outbreaks of disease, which in turn lowered the risk of complications for military personnel stationed in liberated areas. Engineers were able to expand operations to adjacent villages, using successful implementations as models for technical efficiency. Each project strengthened coordination between units, facilitated resource allocation, and provided a replicable blueprint for future reconstruction efforts. Women and families in nearby towns began anticipating similar interventions, spreading awareness of the benefits and building community morale. The first phase of the aftermath illustrates that this was not a one-off technical achievement, but a transformative event that reshaped daily life. German women, who had long endured deprivation, observed not just the return of water, but the return of agency, dignity, and a measure of normalcy. The practical and emotional consequences of this restoration extended far beyond the immediate act, preparing the village for the subsequent stages of recovery and renewal. As the water systems stabilized, the broader impact on the community became evident. Neighborhoods that had been isolated by destroyed pipelines and frozen wells were now connected through a reliable network. Women coordinated household chores more efficiently, spreading tasks throughout the day rather than concentrating exhausting efforts into short windows dictated by limited water access. Children, once tethered to the laborious collection of water, could attend to small chores or play nearby, giving mothers some respite. The subtle rhythms of daily life, cooking, cleaning, and tending to family needs, regained a structure that had been absent for months. The psychological effect on women cannot be overstated. Diaries and letters from this period describe astonishment, disbelief, and joy. Mothers wrote of the first moments they could fill a kettle or basin without fear of freezing or contamination. Some recalled kneeling beside flowing taps, hands trembling, eyes brimming with tears, an unguarded acknowledgement of relief and wonder. Even the elderly, who had long struggled to survive the hardships of war, spoke of renewed hope. For many, running water symbolized the possibility of stability, the return of dignity, and a glimpse of life beyond the immediate struggle for survival. From a military perspective, the operation reinforced the importance of civilian-centered engineering efforts. U.S. Army engineers noted that successful interventions in one village allowed them to replicate methods in neighboring towns. Villages that had observed restoration in nearby communities welcomed engineers more openly, streamlining operations and reducing the risks associated with working in partially hostile or skeptical environments. The combination of technical success and positive civilian reception illustrated a strategic synergy. Humanitarian action supported military objectives by stabilizing liberated zones, improving morale, and reducing potential for unrest. Civilians, especially women, also became intermediaries in the dissemination of knowledge. They shared practical instructions on using pumps, conserving water, and identifying leaks. This informal education empowered households, enabling women to maintain the system and ensuring its long-term functionality. In a war-scarred society, these skills reinforced resilience, independence, and communal cooperation. Observers noted that the active engagement of women in post-restoration maintenance contributed to a sense of ownership over the reconstructed infrastructure, a subtle but significant transformation in social dynamics. Finally, the restored water system had lasting symbolic value. It was a visible marker of Allied engineering capability and a tangible demonstration that war did not solely entail destruction. For German women, it reinforced the contrast between the chaos they had endured and the methodical, constructive presence of U.S. forces. Communities began to perceive the Allies not only as victors, but as facilitators of recovery, capable of rebuilding the very fabric of daily life. Water, a resource once taken for granted, became a lens through which the women understood survival, cooperation, and hope. These consequences laid the foundation for the reflective closure of the story. Beyond pipelines and pumps, the episode demonstrates the intersection of human endurance, engineering skill, and the restoration of dignity, the culmination of months of deprivation, effort, and careful planning. From this, The narrative naturally moves toward reflection on the historical significance of the event and its lasting lessons. The restoration of running water in these German villages was more than an act of engineering. It was a demonstration of how human skill and compassion intersect in the aftermath of conflict. For the women who had lived through months of deprivation, the flowing streams represented survival, dignity, and a fragile but vital return to normal life. Each valve turned, each pipe connected, was a quiet assertion that even amidst devastation, recovery was possible. The sight of water rushing into basins, tubs, and fountains became a symbol of resilience, both of the community and of the human capacity to endure hardship. From a historical perspective, the event illustrates a broader truth about the nature of war and its consequences. Combat does not exist in isolation. It disrupts the everyday rhythms that sustain families and communities. By focusing on civilian needs, particularly those of women who manage households under extreme stress, the Allied engineers demonstrated that military operations could include constructive, life-affirming objectives. The restoration of utilities, while small compared to battles or territorial gains, had a profound ripple effect, improving health, morale, and social stability, while shaping perceptions of the occupying forces. Technically, the operation highlighted the ingenuity and adaptability of wartime engineering. Engineers overcame frozen terrain, destroyed infrastructure, and logistical obstacles to deliver a service that was immediate, tangible, and emotionally significant. Yet the ultimate impact was measured not in maps or flow rates, but in the human responses they elicited: astonishment, relief, quiet laughter, and tears. Women, as primary custodians of domestic life, experienced this impact firsthand, their daily existence transformed by a seemingly simple, essential resource. In reflecting on this moment, it becomes clear that war is not solely about destruction. It is also about restoration, about the intersections of skill, leadership, and empathy. The amazement of German women as water returned to their homes reminds us that even small acts, the flow of water, the fixing of a valve, the careful coordination of hands, can become profound demonstrations of hope. In these quiet moments, the human and the technical converge, leaving an enduring testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the possibility of renewal even in the shadow of devastation.